London, 1845. Unlovable. Josephine Caldwell stared at the word slashed across the society page of the London Gazette, her hands trembling as she read the full account of her disgrace. The paper's description of her as that most unlovable of creatures, a woman whose cold demeanor and scandalous history render her unmarriageable, should not have wounded her after 3 years of similar barbs. Yet somehow, seeing it printed in black and white reopened the wounds afresh. "Miss Caldwell, are you quite well?" Her employer, Lady Harrington, peered at her with more curiosity than concern. "You've gone rather pale." Josephine quickly folded the newspaper, though she knew Lady Harrington had already read the gossip column. Everyone in London had, which explained the smug expression on her employer's face. "Perfectly well, my lady. Shall I fetch your correspondence now?" Josephine kept her voice steady, her posture rigid as she rose from the breakfast table where she had been permitted to take her morning tea. Lady Harrington waved a bejeweled hand. "Yes, yes, and remind cook about the dinner menu. Lord and Lady Quinley will be joining us this evening with their nephew." Josephine nodded and retreated to the sanctuary of the small desk, in the corner of the drawing room where she managed Lady Harrington's household affairs. At 26, serving as a companion to a widow of questionable temperament was hardly the future she had once envisioned. But after the scandal that had destroyed her reputation 3 years prior, she was fortunate to have secured any position in a respectable household. Love, marriage, children. These dreams had died the moment her fiancé had publicly denounced her as a fortune hunter when her father's debts had been revealed. The subsequent revelations, that her father had embezzled funds, that he had taken his own life rather than face imprisonment, that every penny of their supposed wealth had been borrowed or stolen, had completed her ruin. In truth, she had not loved Edmund fairly, but she had respected him, believed him honourable. His betrayal had taught her that love was merely a convenient fiction, a pretty falsehood that disguised the true transaction. Money, status, and advantage. Josephine opened Lady Harrington's correspondence with practiced efficiency. Bills, invitations, a letter from the lady's solicitor. She sorted them methodically, finding solace in order and routine. This was her life now, orderly, predictable, and devoid of foolish expectations. The clock on the mantel struck 10 when the butler announced an unexpected visitor. "The Duke of Quimby, my lady." Lady Harrington's features arranged themselves into a welcoming smile as she rose to greet her guest. "Your Grace, what an unexpected pleasure." Josephine remained at her desk, eyes downcast as the visitor entered. She had never met the Duke of Quimby, but his reputation preceded him. Since inheriting his title 5 years earlier, he had transformed his family's crumbling fortunes through shrewd investments while maintaining an impeccable reputation, despite being one of London's most eligible bachelors. "Lady Harrington, forgive the intrusion. I've come on behalf of my aunt. She sends her regrets but must decline your invitation for this evening. A slight indisposition." The deep, resonant voice drew Josephine's gaze upward against her better judgment. The Duke stood tall and commanding in the centre of the room, his attire immaculate but understated. Dark hair swept back from a high forehead, and keen grey eyes surveyed the room with quiet intelligence. Those eyes met hers for a brief moment, and Josephine immediately returned her attention to her papers, cheeks warm with embarrassment at being caught staring. "What a pity," Lady Harrington said. "We had so looked forward to their company. Though of course we shall still have the pleasure of yours, Your Grace. I regret that I must also decline. Business matters require my attention." He paused, and Josephine sensed rather than saw his gaze return to her. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure of meeting your companion." Lady Harrington's lips thinned with annoyance. "Miss Caldwell is my secretary and household manager. Miss Caldwell, His Grace, the Duke of Quimby." Josephine rose and curtsied, keeping her eyes appropriately lowered. "Your Grace." "Miss Caldwell." There was something in his tone, curiosity, perhaps, that compelled her to look up. When she did, she found him studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Miss Caldwell," he said again, more slowly, "not the daughter of Sir William Caldwell." The question sent ice through her veins. Of course he would know. Everyone knew. Yes, Your Grace, she answered, her voice barely audible. The Duke's expression remained inscrutable. I see. Lady Harrington's gaze darted between them, her interest piqued by this unexpected recognition. Miss Caldwell has been in my employ for nearly 2 years now. Most efficient, if somewhat lacking in social graces. Josephine absorbed the insult without reaction. She had endured far worse. Indeed. I find that difficult to believe, the Duke said, his eyes never leaving Josephine's face. I recall meeting Miss Caldwell once at a musical evening at Lord Pembroke's. She played the pianoforte brilliantly, as I remember, and conversed with great eloquence on the merits of Mozart versus Beethoven. Josephine stared at him in confusion. She had never met the Duke before, and certainly never played at Lord Pembroke's. What game was he playing? You must be mistaken, Your Grace, she said quietly. I have never had the honor of being presented to you before today. A faint smile touched his lips. Perhaps my memory fails me. Age, you know, though I've barely crossed 30. Lady Harrington laughed with calculated charm. Hardly in your dotage, Your Grace, though memory can be treacherous. I was just remarking to Lord Beaumont last week that— Miss Caldwell, the Duke interrupted, might I impose upon you to show me that fascinating portrait in the hallway? The one of Lady Harrington's grandfather, I believe. I've an interest in the artist's technique. Before either woman could object to this extraordinary request, he had moved toward the door, clearly expecting Josephine to follow. Lady Harrington's face registered shock, then calculation. Of course, Your Grace. Miss Caldwell, please attend to His Grace's request. With no choice but to obey, Josephine followed the Duke into the hallway, maintaining a proper distance as they approached the portrait. There is nothing particularly noteworthy about this painting, Your Grace, she said when they were out of earshot, and I cannot imagine why you would claim acquaintance with me when none exists. The Duke turned to face her, his expression now grave. Because I wish to speak with you privately, Miss Caldwell, and I doubted Lady Harrington would allow it without some pretext. Alarm flickered through her. I don't understand. What business could Your Grace possibly have with me? I saw the Gazette this morning, he said simply. Humiliation washed over her anew. Ah, come to satisfy your curiosity about the unlovable Miss Caldwell. I assure you the rumors fall short of the full scandal, if that's what you seek. No, the single word was spoken with such quiet force that Josephine fell silent. I came because that article was unconscionable. The writer, Kester Quinn, is my cousin, and I intend to ensure he retracts his words and publishes an apology. Josephine couldn't have been more stunned if he had announced his intention to fly to the moon. Your cousin, but why would you? That is, I don't understand why you would concern yourself with such a matter. Because it was unjust, and because I knew your father. The mention of her father sent a familiar pain through her chest. Then you know what he did, what he was. I know he was a man who made grave mistakes. I also know he loved his daughter beyond measure and sought to protect her, even at the end. The Duke's voice softened. The final letter he wrote was to me, Miss Caldwell. He asked me to look after you, should the opportunity arise. Josephine stepped back, her mind reeling. That's impossible. My father didn't know you. He would have mentioned. We met through business dealings. I was funding several investments he managed. When things began to unravel, he confessed everything to me, seeking not mercy for himself but protection for you. And yet you did nothing, she said, bitterness creeping into her voice. For 3 years I have endured public humiliation, lost everything, my home, my prospects, my reputation, while you, sir, apparently held a letter from my father asking for your help. The Duke accepted her accusation with a slight nod. I searched for you, Miss Caldwell. You disappeared after the funeral. By the time I discovered you were employed here, nearly a year had passed. I judged it might do more harm than good to approach you then, to reopen wounds that might have begun to heal. And now, what has changed to bring you here today? That damnable article, his jaw tightened. Kester has always been reckless with his pen, but this crossed a line. When I realized he had targeted you specifically, I could no longer stand by. Josephine struggled to process this revelation. I appreciate your concern, Your Grace, but no retraction will undo the damage of the past 3 years. Society has made its judgment. Society, he said with undisguised contempt, is fickle and easily led. Today's scandal becomes tomorrow's forgotten trifle when something more diverting comes along. Perhaps for some, but I am marked, Your Grace. Unlovable, as your cousin so eloquently phrased it. Something flickered in his eyes, anger, perhaps, or determination. That, Miss Caldwell, is the most preposterous claim in that entire slanderous article, and I intend to prove it wrong. Before she could question this extraordinary statement, Lady Harrington's voice called from the drawing-room doorway. Miss Caldwell, I require your assistance. The Duke bowed. Thank you for the enlightening discussion of the portrait, Miss Caldwell. I look forward to continuing our acquaintance. As he departed, Josephine stood frozen, trying to make sense of the encounter. What could he possibly have meant by proving the article wrong? And why did the intensity of his gaze leave her feeling so unsettled? Later that evening, as Josephine prepared for bed in her small attic room, a knock at her door revealed Lady Harrington's maid bearing a sealed letter. Delivered by messenger, miss, for you personally. Alone, Josephine broke the seal, recognizing the ducal crest in the wax. The note was brief but left her breathless. Miss Caldwell, I request the honor of your company tomorrow at 3 o'clock. My carriage will await you at the corner of Berkeley Street. I give you my word as a gentleman that your reputation will be protected. There is much we must discuss regarding your father's wishes and your future. Should you choose not to come, I will understand and will not trouble you further. Quimby. Josephine's first instinct was to burn the note immediately. Meeting a gentleman alone, without a chaperone, it was precisely the sort of behavior that would confirm society's worst opinions of her. And yet she couldn't dismiss the Duke's claim about her father's letter. If such a document existed, she needed to read it to understand her father's final thoughts. Sleep eluded her that night as she wrestled with her decision. By morning, caution had prevailed. She would not meet him. She could not risk what little security she had managed to rebuild. Yet as 3 o'clock approached the following day, Josephine found herself walking toward Berkeley Street, drawn by a mixture of curiosity, hope, and something else she dared not name. She told herself it was merely the desire for closure, for answers about her father's final days. The Duke's carriage was exactly where he had promised, an elegant but unmarked conveyance that wouldn't draw undue attention. The footman opened the door, and Josephine hesitated only briefly before stepping inside. She expected to find the Duke waiting, but the carriage was empty save for a small leather portfolio on the seat opposite. A note was pinned to it. Read these, I will join you shortly. Q. The carriage began to move as she opened the portfolio. Inside lay several letters, all in her father's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the first, dated just days before his death. Your Grace, it began, I write to you not as a businessman seeking clemency, but as a father desperate to protect his child. By the time you read this, I will have paid for my mistakes in the only currency I have left, my life. What I cannot bear is that Josephine will pay for them as well. Tears blurred her vision as she read her father's confession, his remorse, and most painfully, his love for her. He detailed how he had begun borrowing from investment funds to cover gambling debts, then more borrowing to replace what he'd taken, until the web of deception grew beyond his control. I ask nothing for myself, the letter concluded, but if ever the opportunity arises to show kindness to my daughter, I would count it as a mercy I do not deserve. She is everything good and honorable that I am not. Josephine deserves happiness, though I have robbed her of it through my weakness. William Caldwell. A second letter, dated the same day but addressed to Josephine, had never been delivered. In it, her father begged her forgiveness, explained his failings, and urged her to rebuild her life without the burden of his disgrace. You are stronger than you know, my dearest girl, he wrote, and worthy of far more love than this broken world has shown you. Never believe otherwise. The carriage door opened as she finished reading, and the Duke entered, seating himself opposite her. He said nothing as she wiped away tears, giving her time to compose herself. Why didn't you bring these to me sooner? She finally asked, her voice raw with emotion. At first, I couldn't find you. Then when I did, I feared the letters might reopen wounds better left closed. But after reading my cousin's cruel words, I realized you needed to know the truth, that your father's last thoughts were of you, and that his greatest regret was the pain he caused you. Josephine carefully returned the letters to the portfolio. Thank you for sharing these with me. They change nothing about what happened, but perhaps they change how I might remember him. There is more. The Duke leaned forward slightly. Your father entrusted certain financial matters to me before his death. Funds he had set aside for you, legally separate from his estate, which could not be claimed by creditors. Hope flared briefly before reality extinguished it. That's impossible. Everything was sold to pay his debts. The solicitors were quite thorough. Not everything. A slight smile touched his lips. Your father may have made grave mistakes, but he was clever in his final arrangements. The funds were transferred into a trust under my management, with instructions that they be held until you reached the age of 25 or married, whichever came first. I am 26, Josephine said softly. Yes. Which means the funds are now legally yours, enough to provide independence if managed carefully. Josephine stared at him, unable to comprehend this sudden reversal of fortune. After years of depending on the generosity, or more accurately, the need for inexpensive labor, of others, the prospect of independence seemed like a distant dream. Why would you do this? She asked. Honor a request from a man who admitted to criminal actions. You could have kept the money. No one would have known. The Duke's expression darkened. I am many things, Miss Caldwell, but a thief is not among them. And regardless of your father's failings, his love for you was genuine. That, at least, deserves respect. The carriage had been moving steadily through London's streets, and now it slowed as they entered a quiet, respectable neighborhood of terraced houses. Where are we? Josephine asked, suddenly aware of the impropriety of being alone with the Duke in his carriage. Marylebone. I've taken the liberty of securing modest but comfortable accommodations where you might stay while you consider your options. A respectable widow serves as housekeeper. Your reputation will be protected. You assume I will leave Lady Harrington's employ. I assume you will want your freedom once you have the means to secure it. His gaze was steady, challenging. Unless you prefer being belittled daily by a woman who values you only for your utility. Josephine bristled at his presumption, even as she recognized the truth in his words. My choices are my own, Your Grace. Limited though they may be. Of course, he inclined his head slightly. I merely offer options where previously there were none. The choice remains yours. The carriage stopped, and the Duke stepped out, offering his hand to assist her. Josephine hesitated before accepting it, feeling an unexpected warmth at the brief contact. The house before them was modest but well-maintained, with freshly painted shutters and flower boxes beneath the windows. A far cry from Harrington House's grandeur, but vastly superior to the attic room that had been her home these past 2 years. You needn't decide immediately, the Duke said as they approached the front door. The house is leased for 3 months. Take whatever time you require to consider your future. An elderly woman opened the door before they reached it, curtsying deeply at the sight of the Duke. Your Grace, everything is prepared as you requested. Thank you, Mrs. Winters. May I present Miss Caldwell? She will be staying for a time while she considers whether the accommodations suit her needs. Mrs. Winters curtsied again. An honor, miss. I've prepared tea in the drawing room if you'd care for refreshment after your journey. The interior of the house was simply but elegantly furnished, with polished wood floors and walls painted in soft colors. The drawing room featured comfortable chairs arranged before a small fireplace, a writing desk by the window, and bookshelves lined with volumes that, upon closer inspection, included many of Josephine's favorite authors. You've gone to considerable trouble, Josephine observed as Mrs. Winters poured tea and then discreetly withdrew. I cannot help but wonder why. My father's letter alone wouldn't inspire such attentiveness. The Duke took the chair opposite hers, his expression thoughtful. Your father's letter was the beginning, not the entirety. Over the past year, I've made inquiries about you, Miss Caldwell. Discreet ones. You've been investigating me. Josephine set down her teacup, unsure whether to be offended or intrigued. I prefer to think of it as fulfilling my promise to look after your welfare. What I discovered was a woman of remarkable resilience and dignity, who bore unjust censure without becoming bitter or vengeful. You give me too much credit, Your Grace. I have harbored bitterness aplenty. Yet you've never sought to harm those who harmed you, though opportunities must have presented themselves. Lady Harrington, for instance, treats her other servants abominably, from what I gather. A word in the right ear could have cost her their services. Josephine shrugged slightly. What purpose would that serve? Vengeance changes nothing. Precisely. The Duke leaned forward, his expression intent. That capacity for forgiveness, for rising above pettiness, these are rare qualities, Miss Caldwell, qualities I have come to admire greatly. There was something in his tone, in the intensity of his gaze, that sent a flutter of unease, or was it something else entirely, through Josephine's chest? I think perhaps you have constructed a fictional version of me, Your Grace, based on limited information and your own sense of obligation to my father. I assure you, I am neither as noble nor as forgiving as you imagine. No, he smiled slightly. Then you have forgiven neither your former fiancé for his public abandonment, nor society for its eager condemnation. That is different. Those wounds cut too deep for simple forgiveness. Yet you don't seek to wound in return. That, Miss Caldwell, is the very definition of grace under pressure. He set aside his teacup and rose. I have taken enough of your time today. Mrs. Winters will show you the rest of the house, should you wish to see it. The trust documents are in the desk drawer, along with bank drafts you may use immediately. Whether you choose to stay here or return to Lady Harrington is entirely your decision. Josephine stood as well, feeling oddly reluctant to see him leave. And if I choose to stay, what then? Then you begin your life anew, with the freedom to make choices based on desire rather than necessity. He paused at the drawing-room doorway. And perhaps you might permit me to call upon you occasionally, as a friend, nothing more. A duke and a disgraced gentleman's daughter, friends. Josephine couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Society would never accept such an arrangement. I care remarkably little for society's opinion, Miss Caldwell. A luxury afforded by my title and fortune, I realize, but one I exercise with increasing frequency as I grow older. His smile softened the statement. Think on it. I will call tomorrow at 2 to learn your decision. After he departed, Josephine explored the house with Mrs. Winters, finding 3 bedrooms upstairs, a small but well-appointed dining room, and a kitchen where a cook was already preparing dinner. Every detail had been considered, down to a selection of new clothing in the master bedroom's wardrobe, all in her size. His Grace is most generous, Mrs. Winters observed as Josephine ran a hand over a forest green walking dress of fine wool. He was most particular about everything being ready for your arrival. When did he make these arrangements? Josephine asked, puzzled by the timing. Oh, the house has been ready these 3 weeks past, miss. He said it was important to have everything perfect, should you agree to come. 3 weeks before the article in the Gazette, before his visit to Lady Harrington's. The Duke had been planning this for some time then, not acting on impulse after reading his cousin's cruel words. That night Josephine slept in the most comfortable bed she'd known in years, her mind filled with questions. By morning, she had reached her decision. She would stay, at least temporarily, and use this unexpected opportunity to rebuild her life on her own terms. She sent a note to Lady Harrington, resigning her position, enclosed a month's wages in lieu of notice, and requested that her few belongings be sent to the Marylebone address. When the Duke called the following afternoon, Josephine received him in the drawing-room, dressed in the green walking dress she had admired the day before. "You look well, Miss Caldwell," he said, his appraising glance warming her cheeks. "Am I to understand you've decided to accept these accommodations?" "For the present, yes, though I must insist on clarifying the nature of this arrangement." Josephine's voice was firm despite her nervousness. "I am grateful for your assistance in recovering my father's trust, but I cannot accept charity beyond that." There is no charity involved. The house is leased in your name, paid from your trust funds. The staff are employed by you, not me. He seemed amused by her independence. I merely arranged matters until you could take control yourself. And your visits? What purpose do they serve, Your Grace? Friendship, as I said. He studied her for a moment. Though perhaps there is another matter we should discuss, my cousin's article. Josephine tensed. I would prefer to forget it entirely. As would I. However, Kester has refused to issue a retraction. The Duke's expression hardened slightly. He claims his words were merely opinion, not libelous statements of fact. He is not wrong, Josephine said quietly. Describing me as unlovable is cruel but hardly actionable. It's simply what everyone believes. Not everyone. The words hung between them, laden with meaning Josephine dared not interpret. In any case, I believe there is a more effective way to counter such allegations than a simple retraction. And what would that be? Public evidence to the contrary. He held her gaze steadily. If you would permit me, I would like to escort you to several social events in the coming weeks. Nothing too overwhelming at first. A musical evening at my aunt's home, perhaps, or a small dinner party. Josephine stared at him in disbelief. You cannot be serious. I would be shunned. Worse, your reputation would suffer by association. I doubt either of those outcomes, but even if they occurred, I am quite capable of weathering social disapproval. His confidence was both infuriating and oddly compelling. The point, Miss Caldwell, is to demonstrate that you are neither unlovable nor unmarriageable, but rather a woman of intelligence and grace who has been unjustly maligned. To what end? Josephine demanded, rising from her chair in agitation. Even if society were to revise its opinion of me, which I find highly unlikely, what purpose would it serve? I have no desire to re-enter a world that abandoned me so eagerly. The Duke rose as well, his height making her suddenly aware of her own relative smallness. Perhaps not. But wouldn't you prefer that re-entry to be your choice, rather than an impossibility imposed by others? His logic was difficult to refute, yet Josephine remained resistant. I appreciate your concern, Your Grace, but I have no wish to be your charitable project or social experiment. Something flashed in his eyes, frustration, perhaps, or determination. Is that what you believe this is? A project. What else could it be? You made a promise to my father, and now you seek to fulfill it by rehabilitating his disgraced daughter. It's admirable in its way, but unnecessary. Miss Caldwell, he took a step closer, close enough that she could see the varying shades of grey in his eyes. I assure you, my interest in your welfare extends far beyond any promise made to your father. The intensity of his gaze made her heart beat faster. I don't understand. Don't you? His voice softened. I have observed you for many months, albeit from a distance. I've seen your quiet dignity, your resilience in the face of cruelty. I've heard reports of your kindness to those even less fortunate than yourself, the kitchen maid at Harrington House whom you taught to read, the stable boy whose medical care you paid for from your meager salary. Josephine flushed. You have been thorough in your investigations. Necessarily so. I needed to be certain. Certain of what? That my initial assessment of your character was accurate, that you were, indeed, exactly the kind of woman I have been seeking. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. Miss Caldwell, my interest in you is not charitable. It is entirely selfish. Before she could question this extraordinary statement, a knock at the drawing-room door announced Mrs. Winters with tea. The interruption broke the tension between them, allowing Josephine to retreat to the safety of social ritual, pouring tea, offering cake, discussing the unseasonably warm weather. Yet throughout this mundane conversation, she felt the Duke's attention like a physical touch, observant and unwavering. When Mrs. Winters withdrew again, he returned immediately to their interrupted discussion. I have overstepped, he said, surprising her with this admission. Forgive me, my enthusiasm sometimes overcomes my manners. There is nothing to forgive, Josephine replied cautiously. Though I remain confused about your intentions. Then let me be clearer. He set down his teacup with deliberate care. "I would like the opportunity to court you properly, Miss Caldwell. Not as a project or an obligation, but as a woman I have come to admire greatly and wish to know better." The statement was so unexpected that Josephine could only stare at him, certain she had misheard. "Court me? But that's impossible. You're a duke, and I am a gentleman's daughter of good family, temporarily fallen on hard times." He completed her sentence with a firm assertion that brooked no argument. "Your father's actions, regrettable though they were, do not define you, nor does society's misplaced judgment." "The world will not see it that way," she protested. "They will say you have lost your mind, or worse, that I have somehow entrapped you." "Let them say what they will." His dismissal of societal opinion was both shocking and strangely liberating. "I have spent 5 years rebuilding my family's fortune and reputation. I have earned the right to choose my own path forward, including whom I might court." Josephine struggled to process this unexpected declaration. "This is madness. You cannot possibly want. That is, there are countless eligible young ladies of impeccable background and considerable dowry who would. None of whom have demonstrated your strength of character or intelligence." He smiled slightly. "Besides, I find I am particularly drawn to women who argue with me rather than simper in agreement." Despite herself, Josephine felt an answering smile tug at her lips. "Then you must be positively enchanted at present, for I can scarcely do anything but argue with such an irrational proposal." "Not irrational, unconventional, perhaps." His expression grew serious again. "I ask only for the opportunity, Miss Caldwell. Allow me to escort you to a few carefully selected events. Permit me to call upon you regularly. If, after a reasonable period, you find my company intolerable or my suit unwelcome, I will withdraw gracefully and trouble you no further." Put that way, it seemed a small concession to make, given all he had done to restore her independence. And yet Josephine hesitated, aware that accepting even this limited arrangement would make her vulnerable again, to hope, to disappointment, perhaps even to heartbreak. "I will consider it," she said finally. "But I make no promises beyond that." The Duke inclined his head, satisfaction evident in his expression. "That is all I ask, for now." True to his word, the Duke began with small gatherings among his closest family members. His aunt, Lady Quinley, welcomed Josephine with surprising warmth at a musical evening the following week. The only other guests were the Duke's sister and her husband, and a cousin, not, Josephine was relieved to discover, the journalist Kester Quinn. "Kester knows better than to show his face around me at present," the Duke murmured as they entered his aunt's music room. "Though I'm told he regrets his words now, that he understands their consequences." "And what consequences are those?" Josephine asked. "I've withdrawn my investment from the Gazette." "A substantial loss for them, I'm afraid." His tone suggested he felt not the slightest remorse for this financial retaliation. Businesses must learn that irresponsible journalism has costs beyond the moral. Josephine was startled by this revelation. "You didn't need to do that on my account." "Not entirely on your account," he corrected. "The paper has been increasingly reckless in its reporting. Your case was merely the final provocation." The evening passed pleasantly, with Josephine surprising herself by accepting an invitation to play the pianoforte. She chose a piece by Mozart that she had once performed frequently at society gatherings, her fingers finding the familiar patterns despite years of disuse. When she finished, the small audience applauded warmly, but it was the Duke's expression, a mixture of pride and something deeper, more personal, that sent a flush of pleasure through her. Over the following weeks, the Duke, who had asked her to call him Kenneth in private, gradually expanded their social circle. A dinner party at his sister's home introduced Josephine to several influential matrons who, while initially reserved, warmed considerably after observing the Duke's obvious regard for her. "You're working some sort of magic," Josephine accused him lightly as they rode home in his carriage after a particularly successful evening. "These people who once crossed the street to avoid greeting me now invite me to their homes." Kenneth smiled. "No magic, simply the power of example. When people see that I value your company, they reconsider their previous judgment." That's rather cynical. It's practical. Society follows the lead of those with power and influence. I merely use that reality to your advantage. Josephine studied his profile in the dim carriage light. And what do you gain from all this effort, Kenneth? Surely your time could be better spent. He turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. Do you truly not know? The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feeling. Josephine's heart beat faster as Kenneth leaned slightly closer. I gain the pleasure of your company, he said softly. The joy of watching you reclaim your rightful place in society. The satisfaction of seeing you smile without reservation, perhaps for the first time since we met. Is that all? The question slipped out before Josephine could stop it, surprising them both with its boldness. Kenneth's eyes darkened. No, that is not all, but the rest. The rest must wait until you are ready to hear it. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility, until the carriage stopped outside her home, breaking the spell. Kenneth escorted her to the door, but did not attempt to extend the evening, merely kissing her hand in parting with a touch that lingered just long enough to suggest restraint rather than indifference. As spring turned to summer, Josephine found herself at the center of a quiet social rehabilitation. The Duke's influence opened doors that had been firmly closed to her for years. More surprisingly, she discovered that many who had once shunned her now claimed to have always believed in her innocence regarding her father's crimes. Weathervanes, the lot of them, Kenneth remarked after Lady Harrington herself had effusively greeted Josephine at a garden party, claiming to have always seen the quality in you, my dear. Not everyone is so fickle, Josephine said, thinking of the few friends who had stood by her in the darkest days after her father's death. Though I admit, the transformation is rather dizzying. Kenneth offered his arm as they strolled through the garden. Are you happy, Josephine? The question gave her pause. Was she happy? The material circumstances of her life had certainly improved. She had comfortable lodgings, financial security, and a steadily expanding circle of social connections. Yet happiness seemed too simple a word for the complex emotions she experienced. I am grateful, she said carefully, for the opportunities you've created, for the chance to rebuild something of my former life. But not happy, he persisted. Josephine sighed. I don't know if I remember how to be simply happy, Kenneth. Too much has happened. I've changed too much. Change isn't always loss, he said quietly. Sometimes it's growth. The Josephine Caldwell who exists today is stronger, wiser, more compassionate than the girl who never knew hardship or betrayal. Perhaps, she conceded, but also more cautious. Less trusting. With good reason, he guided her toward a stone bench partially secluded by flowering shrubs. Trust must be earned, not given blindly. As they sat, Josephine realized they were effectively hidden from the other guests, creating an illusion of privacy that was both concerning and thrilling. Have you earned my trust, Kenneth? Is that what you're suggesting? His smile held a hint of challenge. Have I not proven myself reliable, honest in my dealings with you? Yes, she admitted, though your motives remain somewhat mysterious. Do they? He shifted slightly, facing her more directly. I thought I had made them increasingly clear over these past months. Josephine's pulse quickened. You've spoken of friendship, of admiration, of righting a wrong done to me by society and by your cousin particularly. All true, but incomplete. Kenneth reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. Josephine, surely you must know that my feelings for you have grown far beyond friendship or admiration. Though she had suspected, hoped, even hearing the words spoken aloud sent a shock through her system. Kenneth, please let me finish. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. I began this with mixed motives, I admit. A promise to your father, yes. A sense of injustice at your treatment. But as I've come to know you, your strength, your intelligence, your fundamental decency despite all you've endured, those initial reasons have been overshadowed by something far more powerful. Josephine scarcely dared breathe. And what is that? Love, the word hung between them, simple and profound. I love you, Josephine, not as a project or a cause, but as the woman I wish to spend my life with. The woman I wish to make my duchess. The world seemed to still around them. In the distance, Josephine could hear the murmur of party guests, birds singing in the trees, but these sounds seemed to belong to another reality entirely. You cannot mean that, she whispered, though his expression left little doubt of his sincerity. The scandal would be short-lived and ultimately meaningless. His certainty was almost overwhelming. My position is secure enough to weather any temporary gossip. And in truth, I think you underestimate how successfully you've been reintegrated into society these past months. There would be talk, certainly, but not the outrage you fear. Josephine withdrew her hand, needing physical distance to think clearly. This is unexpected. Kenneth smiled slightly. Is it? I thought I had been embarrassingly transparent in my regard. Regard, yes, but marriage. She shook her head, still struggling to accept the magnitude of his proposal. Kenneth, you must consider carefully. There are political alliances, family expectations. All satisfied by my fortune and title alone. His dismissal of these concerns was characteristic of his pragmatic approach to society's rules. My family's position is secure. I have no need to marry for connections or additional wealth. I have earned the right to marry for love, Josephine. The simplicity of his argument was compelling, yet Josephine couldn't quite silence the voice of doubt that had been her constant companion these past years. And if I cannot return your feelings? If gratitude and friendship are all I can offer? Something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or a momentary vulnerability that touched her deeply. Then I would be disappointed, but would value your honesty. Our friendship would continue, if you wished it. His dignified acceptance of this possibility only increased Josephine's confusion. Did she love him? The question had lurked at the edges of her consciousness for weeks now, deliberately unexamined for fear of the answer. Kenneth had become essential to her daily life, his visits a source of pleasure, his conversations stimulating, his respect for her opinions a balm to her wounded pride. But love, after swearing never to make herself vulnerable again. I need time, she said finally. This is too important a decision to make hastily. Relief softened his features. Not a rejection, then. No, Josephine admitted, surprising herself with the certainty of this answer. Not a rejection. But not yet an acceptance either. Kenneth nodded, then stood and offered his hand to help her rise. Take whatever time you need, Josephine. I am a patient man, at least. His smile turned wry, in matters of true importance. They rejoined the party, their outward behavior giving no hint of the momentous conversation that had occurred. Yet Josephine felt irrevocably changed, as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted, revealing new possibilities she had long since abandoned. That night, alone in her bedchamber, Josephine confronted the question she had been avoiding. Did she love Kenneth Quimby, the man who had restored her fortune, her place in society, and perhaps most importantly, her belief in her own worth? The answer came not in a sudden revelation, but in a series of remembered moments. Kenneth's expression as he listened to her play the pianoforte, intent and appreciative. His quiet fury when Lady Harrington had made a cutting remark about persons who rise above their proper station. The respect in his voice when he asked her opinion on matters of politics or philosophy. The careful distance he maintained physically, never presuming upon their growing intimacy. Yes, she realized with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She did love him, despite her vow never to risk her heart again, despite the rational arguments against such a match, despite everything, she loved him. The admission, even to herself, was frightening. To love was to become vulnerable, to open oneself to potential pain. Yet wasn't that the very courage Kenneth had recognized in her from the beginning, the willingness to face difficulty without surrendering to bitterness or despair? Morning brought no easy resolution to her dilemma. Josephine went about her day distracted, considering and reconsidering Kenneth's proposal and her own feelings, when a note arrived inviting her to dine at his home the following evening. A small gathering of friends, nothing formal, she accepted with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The Duke's London residence was imposing but welcoming, its elegant rooms reflecting his taste for comfort rather than ostentation. Josephine was surprised to discover that the small gathering consisted of only 4 people. Herself, Kenneth, his aunt Lady Quinley, and his sister Lady Harriet. "I hope you don't mind the intimacy," Kenneth murmured as he escorted her into the drawing room. "I thought you might prefer close family to a larger party, given our recent conversation." The thoughtfulness of this arrangement touched her. "Thank you, though I confess I haven't yet reached any conclusion about that matter." He smiled reassuringly. "As I said, take whatever time you need. Tonight is simply dinner with friends." The evening progressed pleasantly, with conversation flowing easily among the small group. Lady Quinley, in particular, seemed determined to make Josephine feel welcome, sharing family stories that revealed Kenneth's childhood foibles. "He was the most stubborn child," she recounted with evident affection. "Once he'd set his mind on something, wild horses couldn't drag him from it. When he was 8, he decided he would build a boat to sail on the lake at Quimby Park. For weeks, he disappeared after his lessons, returning covered in splinters and grinning like a fiend. His poor tutor nearly went mad with worry." "And did you succeed?" Josephine asked Kenneth, charmed by this glimpse of the boy he had been. "After a fashion," he admitted. "The boat floated for nearly 10 minutes before sinking spectacularly. I was undeterred, however, and began plans for a second attempt immediately, which father wisely redirected by engaging a shipwright to teach you properly," Lady Harriet added. Kenneth's second boat not only floated but could carry 3 passengers. It's still at Quimby Park, though rather weathered now. The anecdote illuminated something essential about Kenneth's character. His determination, his willingness to learn from failure rather than be defeated by it. Qualities that had served him well in rebuilding his family's fortunes, and in his patient courtship of Josephine herself. After dinner, Lady Quinley suggested music, and Josephine found herself at the pianoforte again, playing while Lady Harriet sang a popular ballad. As the evening drew to a close, Lady Quinley made an unexpected announcement. "Harriet and I are departing for Quimby Park tomorrow. The London season is nearly over, and the country air will be a welcome change. We hope you might join us there in a fortnight, Miss Caldwell. The gardens are particularly lovely in late summer." The invitation, clearly approved, if not orchestrated, by Kenneth, represented another step in her social rehabilitation. A stay at the Duke's country estate would signal his serious intentions to society at large. "You're under no obligation," Kenneth said later, as he escorted Josephine to her carriage. "Though I would be delighted if you accepted." Josephine hesitated. "It would be a significant statement, Kenneth." "Yes," he agreed simply, "it would." The weight of the decision pressed upon her. To accept was to acknowledge publicly the possibility of their future together. To decline might be interpreted as a rejection of his suit entirely. "I'll consider it," she said finally, "and let you know my answer soon." Kenneth nodded then, with a glance to ensure they were unobserved by the footman, raised her hand to his lips. Unlike his previous, courteous kisses, this one lingered, his lips warm against her skin, sending a shiver of awareness through her entire body. "Good night, Josephine," he murmured, his voice pitched low for her ears alone. "Dream well." The journey home gave Josephine time to reflect on the evening and its implications. The warmth of Kenneth's family toward her, the clear acceptance of her as a potential duchess, the intimate dinner rather than a grand event, all suggested a man confident in his choice and unconcerned with society's potential censure. Could it truly be so simple? To accept his love, to give her own in return, to set aside the bitter lessons of the past in favor of a future built on mutual respect and affection. As her carriage approached her home, Josephine noticed another vehicle parked outside, an unfamiliar closed carriage with no visible crest or markings. Unease prickled along her spine as she wondered who might be calling at this late hour. Mrs. Winters greeted her at the door, her expression troubled. "There's a gentleman waiting in the drawing room, miss. I told him it was most irregular, but he insisted the matter couldn't wait until morning." "Did he give his name?" "Yes, miss. Mr. Edmund Fairley." The name hit Josephine like a physical blow. Edmund, her former fiancé, who had publicly denounced her as a fortune hunter when her father's crimes were revealed. The man whose rejection had been the first in a cascade of humiliations. "How long has he been waiting?" she asked, removing her gloves with deliberate calm. "Nearly an hour, miss." "Shall I send him away?" Josephine considered this option briefly before curiosity overcame her initial shock. Why would Edmund seek her out now, after more than 3 years of silence? "No, I'll see him." "Please bring tea." Squaring her shoulders, Josephine entered the drawing room to find Edmund standing by the fireplace, looking much as she remembered him. Tall, conventionally handsome, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to deference. He turned at her entrance, his expression difficult to interpret. "Josephine, thank you for seeing me at this unconventional hour." She did not invite him to sit. "What brings you here, Mr. Fairley?" "I confess, I'm at a loss to imagine what business we might have after so long a separation." Edmund had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I deserve your coldness. My behavior toward you was less than honorable." "Indeed," Josephine maintained her distance, standing near the doorway. "Is that all you've come to say? If so, consider it acknowledged and good night." "Please," he gestured toward the chairs. "May we sit? There is more I wish to discuss." Reluctantly, Josephine took a seat, positioning herself as far from him as the small room allowed. Edmund sat opposite her, leaning forward with an earnestness that once might have moved her. "I've been following your return to society these past months," he began. "Your connection to the Duke of Quimby has not gone unremarked." "My friendship with His Grace is hardly a secret," Josephine replied coolly, "though I fail to see how it concerns you." Edmund shifted uncomfortably. "There are rumors, speculation about the nature of your relationship and his intentions." "Again, I fail to see how this concerns you, Mr. Fairley." "Because I care what happens to you, Josephine." His voice softened, taking on a persuasive tone she remembered all too well. "We were once to be married. Despite how things ended between us, I have never forgotten you." "Mrs." Winters entered with the tea tray, providing a momentary respite from the increasingly uncomfortable conversation. As she poured and served, Josephine gathered her thoughts, puzzling over Edmund's purpose in seeking her out. When they were alone again, she addressed him directly. "Mr. Fairley, while I appreciate your concern, our past connection gives you no claim on my present circumstances. Whatever friendship exists between the Duke and myself is our affair alone." "Friendship?" Edmund's smile was knowing, almost pitying. "Is that what you believe it to be? Josephine, you are being naive. Men like Quimby don't form friendships with women in your position without ulterior motives." Anger flashed through her, and what position would that be precisely? "You know what I mean. A woman alone, with a damaged reputation, limited means." "My means are not as limited as you might imagine," Josephine interrupted, "nor is my reputation as damaged as it once was. Thanks in part to the Duke's support, certainly, but also to my own efforts." Edmund set down his teacup with a sharp click. "He's using you, Josephine, creating a scandal to distract from his business dealings. Did you know he's negotiating a controversial railway contract that would displace dozens of tenant farmers? Your friendship provides society with a more entertaining topic of conversation." The accusation was so unexpected that Josephine momentarily faltered. "That's absurd. Kenneth would never." "Kenneth?" Edmund seized on her use of the Duke's given name. "So it's Kenneth now, is it? How familiar you've become." Josephine rose, her patience exhausted. "I think you should leave, Mr. Fairley. Whatever your purpose in coming here, it's clear we have nothing further to discuss." Edmund stood as well, his expression hardening. "I came to warn you as a friend, to prevent you from being used and discarded when Quimby tires of the game, but I see you're determined to learn the hard way." Again. The barb struck home, reviving painful memories of her previous humiliation. "Thank you for your concern," Josephine said stiffly. "Good night, Mr. Fairley." After Edmund departed, Josephine remained in the drawing room, troubled by his warnings despite her rational dismissal of them. Could there be any truth to his claims? Was Kenneth using their relationship to deflect attention from controversial business dealings? No, she decided after careful reflection. Edmund's accusations were too convenient, too perfectly calibrated to exploit her existing insecurities. Kenneth had been nothing but honorable in his dealings with her, transparent in his intentions, patient in his courtship. To doubt him now, based solely on the bitter insinuations of a man who had once betrayed her, would be the height of foolishness. And yet, as she prepared for bed, a small seed of doubt had been planted. Not about Kenneth's feelings, those she now believed were genuine, but about the wisdom of accepting his proposal. If their marriage generated such speculation before it even existed, what storms might they face if it became reality? The next morning brought a note from Kenneth, inquiring if she might join him for a drive in Hyde Park that afternoon. Josephine accepted, determined to put Edmund's visit behind her and focus on the decision she still needed to make regarding Quimby Park. The day was perfect for driving, sunny but not too warm, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of flowers from the park's extensive gardens. Kenneth arrived promptly at 2, driving an elegant open carriage himself rather than bringing his coachman. "I thought you might enjoy the informality," he explained as he helped her up to the seat beside him, "and the privacy. My coachman, while excellent, has unfortunately perfect hearing." Josephine smiled at this small consideration. "Privacy would be welcome. I have much to discuss with you." "As do I with you." Kenneth guided the horses expertly through London's busy streets toward the park. "But first, tell me about your evening after you left. Did you sleep well?" The innocent question presented an immediate dilemma. Should she mention Edmund's visit? On one hand, concealing it felt dishonest. On the other, reporting it might seem like she was giving credence to his accusations. Honesty prevailed. "I had an unexpected visitor, Edmund Fairley." Kenneth's hands tightened visibly on the reins before relaxing again. "Indeed. And what did your former fiancé want after all this time?" "To warn me about you, apparently." Josephine kept her tone light, though the conversation had been anything but. "He suggested our friendship is a convenient distraction from controversial business dealings. Something about a railway contract." Kenneth's expression darkened momentarily before he schooled his features into careful neutrality. "I see. And did you believe these warnings?" "No," Josephine said firmly. "Though I confess, I wondered if there might be some truth to the railway matter itself, if not his interpretation of our relationship." They had reached the park now, joining the procession of carriages along the fashionable driving path. Kenneth guided their vehicle to a quieter side lane before responding. "There is a railway contract under negotiation, yes, one that would indeed affect some tenant farmers on land adjacent to Quimby Park." His tone was measured, factual. "What Fairley failed to mention, I suspect, is that I've spent the past 6 months developing a comprehensive relocation plan for those tenants, including new cottages built at my expense and compensation for any disruption to their livelihoods." Relief washed through Josephine. "I thought it must be something like that." Edmund's version seemed inconsistent with the man I've come to know. Kenneth glanced at her, his expression softening. "Thank you for that, Faith, and for your honesty in telling me about his visit. Many women might have kept it to themselves." "I've had enough of secrets and misunderstandings," Josephine said simply. "If there is to be any future for us, Kenneth, it must be built on complete honesty." His smile was immediate and warming. "Does that mean you're considering a future for us, then?" Josephine felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "I'm considering accepting your invitation to Quimby Park, at least. As for the rest, I'm still thinking." "Fair enough." Kenneth guided the carriage toward a secluded spot beneath a spreading oak tree, where they could observe the passing parade of society without being too conspicuous themselves. "In the spirit of complete honesty, there is something I should tell you as well." A flutter of apprehension stirred in Josephine's chest. "Yes. I received a letter this morning from my cousin Kester. He wishes to make amends for his article about you." Kenneth's expression was difficult to read. He's offered to publish a retraction and apology in next week's Gazette. That's unexpected. Josephine wasn't sure how to feel about this development. On one hand, a public apology would help restore her reputation. On the other, it would draw renewed attention to a humiliation she'd rather forget. Did you ask him to do this? No, though I made my displeasure known, as I told you. The decision to apologize appears to be his own. Kenneth hesitated. He's asked to meet you, to offer his apology in person before publishing it. The request was so surprising that Josephine laughed in disbelief. Meet me, the woman he labeled unlovable, without ever having been introduced. That seems rather presumptuous. I thought you might feel that way. Kenneth's smile was wry. I told him I would convey his request, but made no promises regarding your response. Josephine considered the matter carefully. What would you advise? That depends on what you want, Josephine. Kenneth turned slightly on the seat to face her more directly. If you truly wish to put the past behind you, refusing his apology, both personal and public, might be the simplest course. But if you seek more complete vindication in society's eyes, his retraction could be useful. The pragmatism of this assessment was characteristic of Kenneth, and Josephine appreciated his refusal to make the decision for her. I think I would prefer to meet him, actually, not for vindication, but for my own peace of mind. To see the man behind those cruel words and perhaps understand why he wrote them. Kenneth nodded, approval evident in his expression. I thought you might say that. Your capacity for forgiveness continues to astonish me. It isn't forgiveness yet, Josephine corrected, merely curiosity, and perhaps a desire to close that particular chapter definitively before. She trailed off, uncertain how to complete the thought. Before considering new beginnings, Kenneth suggested gently. Yes, she met his gaze directly, finding strength in his unwavering support. Before that. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, until the distant sound of approaching riders broke the spell. Kenneth picked up the reins again, guiding the carriage back toward the main path. I'll arrange the meeting, he said. My home would provide neutral ground if that suits you. Thank you. Josephine settled back in her seat, watching the fashionable world pass by, nodding to acquaintances who now acknowledged her openly. How strange to think that just months ago, these same people had shunned her completely. As they completed their circuit of the park, Josephine made her decision. I'll come to Quimby Park, she said suddenly, after meeting your cousin. If that invitation still stands. Kenneth's smile was immediate and transformative. It stands, Josephine. It will always stand. The meeting with Kester Quinn was scheduled for the following afternoon at the Duke's London residence. Josephine arrived precisely at the appointed time, her nerves betraying her outward composure. This man had wounded her deeply with his careless words. Facing him would require all her hard-won dignity. Kenneth met her in the entrance hall, taking her hands in his. You don't have to do this, he reminded her. Say the word and I'll send him away. Josephine shook her head. No, I need to do this. For myself. He nodded, understanding in his eyes, and led her to his study rather than the more formal drawing room. I thought you might prefer a less ceremonial setting. Kester is waiting inside. Kester Quinn bore a family resemblance to Kenneth, the same height and build, similar features. But where the Duke projected strength and certainty, his cousin seemed nervous, almost fragile. He rose immediately when they entered, bowing deeply. Miss Caldwell, thank you for agreeing to see me. Josephine inclined her head slightly, but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. Kenneth remained beside her, his solid presence a reassuring anchor. I owe you an apology, Kester began, his voice steadier than his expression. My article was cruel, unfair, and entirely without justification. I wrote it during a difficult period in my own life, and I used you as a convenient target for my bitterness. There is no excuse for such behavior. The direct acknowledgement of wrongdoing surprised Josephine, who had expected equivocation or justification. Why me, Mr. Quinn? We had never met. What made me a convenient target, as you put it? Kester glanced at Kenneth, then back to Josephine. Because of your connection to my cousin, I had. disagreements with Kenneth about certain financial matters. When I noticed his interest in your welfare, I seized the opportunity to cause trouble. It was petty, spiteful, and inexcusable. You used Miss Caldwell to exact revenge on me, Kenneth clarified, his voice cold. Without consideration for the damage you might do to an innocent woman's reputation. Yes, Kester didn't attempt to soften the accusation. I did exactly that, and I have regretted it every day since. Josephine studied the man before her, seeing not the powerful journalist whose words had cut so deeply, but a troubled individual whose own pain had spilled over onto others. What changed? She asked. Why apologize now after so many months? Because I've seen the consequences of my actions, Kester replied. Not just in Kenneth's withdrawal of financial support from the Gazette, but in the real harm done to you. And because I've experienced similar judgment myself recently, a taste of my own medicine, you might say. Interest piqued, Josephine raised an eyebrow. Oh. I made an unfortunate investment that became public knowledge. Nothing illegal, but certainly ill-advised. The resulting gossip and ridicule have been, he paused, searching for words, instructive. Despite herself, Josephine felt a flicker of empathy. It's unpleasant to be the subject of society's judgment, isn't it? To have your character defined by a single mistake or misfortune. Yes, Kester met her gaze directly for the first time. Precisely. Though in your case, the judgment was entirely undeserved. You had committed no wrong, made no error. You were simply the daughter of a man who did. The acknowledgement, so long denied by society at large, touched something deep in Josephine's heart. Thank you for saying that, Mr. Quinn. I've written a retraction, Kester continued, reaching into his coat to withdraw a folded paper. It will be published in next week's Gazette. I wanted you to review it first, to ensure it meets with your approval. Josephine accepted the document but did not immediately open it. Mr. Quinn, while I appreciate the gesture, I must ask what you hope to achieve with this retraction. For yourself, I mean. The question seemed to surprise him. I hadn't considered. That is, I suppose I hope for some measure of absolution, though I have no right to expect it. No, Josephine agreed, you don't. But I am willing to accept your apology nonetheless, Mr. Quinn. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I choose not to carry the weight of resentment any longer. Relief softened Kester's features. You are most generous, Miss Caldwell, far more than I merit. Not generous, she corrected. Practical, bitterness serves no purpose except to poison one's own happiness. She unfolded the retraction and scanned its contents, finding it thorough and appropriately contrite. This will do, Mr. Quinn. Thank you. The meeting concluded shortly thereafter, with Kester departing after one final, sincere apology. When he had gone, Josephine turned to Kenneth, who had remained a silent presence throughout the exchange. That was not what I expected, she admitted. Kenneth smiled slightly. Kester can be surprisingly humble when properly motivated, though in this case I believe his contrition is genuine. As do I, Josephine moved to the window, watching as Kester's figure disappeared down the street. It's strange. For so long I've defined myself by the judgments of others, my father's crimes, Edmund's rejection, society's condemnation, even that article's cruel assessment. But meeting the man behind those words, seeing his own vulnerability, it changes something. Kenneth came to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. What does it change? My perception, I suppose. The power I've given to others' opinions. She turned to face him. I've been afraid, Kenneth, afraid to trust, to hope, to believe in the possibility of happiness again. Afraid that if I accepted your proposal, someday you might regret it, or worse, that you might never have meant it sincerely in the first place. Josephine, he began, but she raised a hand to stop him. Please, let me finish. These fears, they're not entirely irrational, given my experience, but I've allowed them to become the foundation of my worldview, unlovable. I accepted that judgment because it seemed safer than risking disappointment again. She took a deep breath, gathering courage for the words that would change everything. But I don't want safety anymore. I want happiness, joy, love, All the things I convinced myself were beyond my reach. Kenneth's eyes never left her face, hope kindling in their depths. And where might you find these things? With you, the admission felt like stepping off a precipice and finding, miraculously, that she could fly. If your offer still stands. It does. Kenneth closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. It always will. Josephine Caldwell, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Yes, the word emerged as barely more than a whisper, but it contained absolute certainty. Yes, Kenneth. I will. His smile blazed with such joy that it nearly took her breath away. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers, a first kiss so gentle, so reverent, that tears sprang to Josephine's eyes. When they separated, Kenneth rested his forehead against hers, their hands still linked between them. I have loved you since the moment you stood in Lady Harrington's hallway and questioned my motives, he confessed. Your courage, your dignity in the face of unjust treatment, I knew then that you were extraordinary. And I have loved you, Josephine replied, since you showed me that I could still trust, still hope, still believe in the fundamental goodness of at least one person in this world. Their second kiss was deeper, a promise of the life they would build together, a life neither could have imagined just months earlier. The wedding of the Duke of Quimby and Miss Josephine Caldwell took place that autumn at Quimby Park, with a select gathering of family and those friends who had stood by Josephine in her darkest days. Society papers reported the event with glowing praise for the bride's beauty and accomplishments, with no mention of past scandals or disgraces. And if the most laudatory article appeared in the London Gazette, written by one Kester Quinn, who described the match as a union of true minds and loving hearts, proving that genuine worth will always find its proper recognition in the end, well, perhaps that was simply justice, finally served. As for the bride herself, as she stood beside her husband greeting their guests at the wedding breakfast, she caught sight of the Gazette article and smiled. Unlovable, it seemed, had been the most ridiculous misconception of all.